Parshas Pinchas, the section of the Torah that we read this week concerning the reward that God gave Pinchas, the zealot, for killing Zimri and Cosbi, the Jewish prince, leader of the tribe of Shimon, and Cosbi, a Midianite princess, who were consorting. Pinchas, we read in the end of last week's Torah portion, killed them both. And now the Torah begins a new portion, not a continuation just of the other one, but it's a separate portion in which God tells Pinchas that he would be given a special reward, a covenant, an eternal covenant of priesthood, because he's the one who saved the day. God gave this message to Moses to tell him about Pinchas, that he saved the Jewish people because God would have vented his rage against them if he had not done what he did. And therefore his reward is that he's going to be given my covenant of peace. And he and his children afterwards would have this eternal covenant of priesthood because of his zealotry. Then the Torah goes on to tell us who these people were. What were their names? The name of the Jewish man who he killed was Zimri, the son of Salu, who was the leader of the tribe of Shimon. And the name of the woman who was smitten, the Midianite woman, was Cosbi, the daughter of Tzur, who was one of the leaders of Midian. And the question could be asked here, why does the Torah identify them in this week's Torah portion and not in the initial description of what they did? Zimri brings in this Cosbi without naming each one, just as the Jewish man and the Midianite woman, and they commit this crime. The name is conspicuously absent, just Ish Yisrael, a Jewish man, and a Midianite woman. And here, when Pinchas gets his reward, and God commends him for what he did, the Torah says, oh, by the way, you should know that the name of this man was Zimri and the name of this woman was Cosbi. Why not mention their names at the very beginning? So perhaps we can understand this and answer this by showing that there's a parallel to this at the very beginning of the Torah, when the Torah describes the very first sin. Because whenever we talk about sin in the Torah, we have to realize that all sins, the possibility, the potential for sins, came about as a result of Adam and Eve's sin when they partook of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That sin reduced humanity to a level where they have to struggle to maintain themselves, that they should resist sinning, resist the temptation of sinning. So when anything goes wrong in terms of the people sinning, we have to take our cue from the very first sin, because that set into motion a process of rehabilitation. You see, we don't believe that the sin of the tree of knowledge was not done for a positive reason. Yes, it was a sin, it was a transgression, but God made it so difficult for them to resist. It's as if God was orchestrating this sin as a way of getting humanity to have a struggle between good and evil. Had Adam and Eve not sinned and they would have lived forever, then the world would have been a perfect world without any effort of humanity. The Torah wants us to know that we have a role in perfecting the world. It's not going to come down from on high. Some angel's going to come down and transform the world. We have to transform it. We have to bring about our salvation. God, of course, gives us the assistance. He gives us the wherewithal. He gives us the inspiration. But it's up to us to make the difference in this world. And therefore, when we want to know about any sin, whatever sin we read about in the Torah and beyond the Torah, we have to take our cue from the first time humanity was given the opportunity to fall as a stepping stone for them to rehabilitate. So what is the first sin? Adam and Eve, first Eve, of course, was tempted by the serpent to partake of the tree of knowledge. And when she realized that she was naked, and she gave it to Adam, and they realized they were naked, they covered themselves with a fig leaf. Now, what fruit was the tree of knowledge? The myth is that it was an apple. Well, that's absolutely based on nothing. There is no indication anywhere that it was an apple. But there are 4 opinions registered in the Talmud and Midrash as to what kind of fruit it was. Why are there 4 opinions? Besides the fact that, of course, we can never agree. We have to come up with different opinions. But seriously, the reason why there are 4 opinions is because each one of those trees conveys a certain message that helps us in our rehabilitation. We won't go into all 4, but one of the 4 opinions registered in the Talmud is that the tree, the fruit of the tree of knowledge was a fig, and it was a fig tree. And what is that based on? It's based on the fact that after they ate of the fruit and they realized that they were naked, what did they use to cover themselves? They used a fig leaf. So the question is, why a fig leaf? And the answer, Rashi cites, is that all the other trees refused to allow them to take their leaves with which to cover themselves because they did not want to be associated with Adam and Eve's sin. They looked down at Adam and Eve. You see, nature resists immorality. Yes, there are times when it takes a long time for nature to resist the immorality, but it has the power that God created nature. For example, God created the nature of a human being, that an animal is naturally fearful of a human being. But the reason why animals are not fearful in reality is because the human being has lost his humanity, his divine image. God created us in the image of God. That means a human being has a naturally godly image, and an animal is afraid to touch that human being, and therefore the animal is going to be fearful of the human being. But if the human being degrades himself, nature says, we're not going to defer to you. Same thing over here. When Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit, the tree said, we don't want to have to deal with you because you have lost your humanity, your divine soul's glory and radiance has left you, and therefore we are not going to submit to your needs. Well, if that's the case, why did the fig tree allow them to take a fig leaf to cover themselves? Here the answer is because the fig was implicated in the sin itself. The fig was the fruit that they ate. And since the fig was degraded as well, the fig did not resist using the fig tree rather, did not resist using its leaf to cover them up, to start the process of rehabilitation. So then the question is, why doesn't the Torah mention that it was a fig when they ate of the fruit? It doesn't say. It just says a tree of knowledge of good and evil. It doesn't say what kind of tree. So Rashi says because the Torah does not want to embarrass the tree, the fig, to identify it. It would make people not look at figs the way they always looked at figs, as a wonderful, luscious fruit. It says one of the 7 fruits that Israel is known for and praised for is the fig. But we would look at the fig askance and would say, what kind of a fruit are you? You're the cause of this terrible sin and the degradation of humanity and bringing evil into the world and death into the world. That's why the Torah hides the identity of the fig. So that raises a very obvious question. But the Torah did expose the identity of the fig when it says that they used a fig leaf to cover themselves. If the Torah wanted to hide it, the Torah shouldn't have mentioned that they took a fig leaf. It could have just said they took a leaf of some tree. So what do we see over here? We see over here a very profound idea. That when the Torah describes the sin, the Torah does not want us to get sidetracked, to start focusing on incidentals, that it was a fig that caused them to be degraded. The Torah wants to focus on what happened to the people and what the sin was. The sin was that they took the liberty to violate God's command not to eat of that tree, and that's all that counts. We don't want to implicate the other aspects of this sin, that it was a fig tree and so on and so forth. Once they are rehabilitated, we do want to identify the tree because we want to say that this fig was instrumental in their rehabilitation. So we look very differently at it. When you see someone doing something wrong, initially your reaction is going to be, this is a terrible person. You're going to have the first impression is always an impression that lasts. So that when you discover that a person did a sin only after the person repented, after the person was involved in being rehabilitated, then you no longer look at the person in a negative way. If someone will tell you, this person, he insulted you, you would be very upset at that person. And not only that, it would be hard for you to ever look at that person in a positive way. But if someone tells you, this person did something very beneficial for you and praised you and did you a favor, and you should understand that this person once insulted you, but this is how they changed, you would look at the person very differently. So that's why the Torah doesn't tell us it was a fig, because if it tells us it was a fig, we would never look at a fig the same way. It would detract from our respect for the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, the fruits of Israel. It would take away from the mitzvah of Bikurim. Bikurim is the first fruits we have to bring to the temple as a way of showing gratitude to God for the beauty of the land and the fruits of the land. And one of those fruits is the fig. We would not be able to fulfill the mitzvah properly. We would say, hey, the fig is the source of all of our problems. It brought death to the world, and with death, with all the negatives in the world. But now that we know that the fig was the leaf that brought about the rehabilitation, it started the rehabilitation process, the fig is now a hero. It's the fruit that allowed us to change and to rehabilitate ourselves. Same thing can be said over here. If we had read in last week's Torah portion that Zimri and Cosby were the culprits, this would color them forever in a negative way. This would forever focus on their identities as sinners. The Torah doesn't want us to do that. The Torah wants us to focus on the sin itself, regardless of who did it. Who were the culprits? Who were the criminals? Who were the people who transgressed? First of all, the Torah does not want to besmirch their name, and we'll soon explain why we wouldn't want Torah to besmirch their name. After all, they did sin, and we don't find that they did tshuva, that they repented. But the Torah doesn't want us to be sidetracked. It wants us to focus on the sin itself. Now that we're reading in this week's parsha of Pinchas, how Pinchas was rewarded for his act of zealotry, for saving the lives of so many Jews. It turns out that Zimri and Cosby were the catalyst for something very special, because what resulted as a consequence of Pinchas's action, his very drastic action to kill Zimri and Cosby, he was given the gift of priesthood, which he was not entitled to before, as Rashi explains. He was not anointed, but now he's going to be a priest, and his descendants forever will be Kohanim, will be priests. But beyond that, our sages tell us that Pinchas hu Eliyahu, Pinchas is the same person as Elijah, a prophet who emerges hundreds of years later, is not another person. He is Pinchas. Pinchas is Eliyahu. And what is the special quality of Eliyahu? Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu the prophet, is the one who comes to every Seder, who comes to every bris. He is going to announce the coming of Mashiach. He's going to bring peace between father and son, son and father. He is going to change the whole world in the most positive way. Not only that, but when Mashiach comes, he will be instrumental. He will be the power that will bring about Tchias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. He will reverse all of the sins, all of the effects of the sins of the past. And that would eliminate the whole prospects of death. All that came about because of Zimri and Cosby. So now what we're reading about Zimri and Cosby, we read about them in a different way. Oh, these are the people who were instrumental in making this positive changes. But someone may still wonder and say, but still, they didn't do tshuva. Nothing positive came out of them. And the answer to that is that according to the Arizal, their souls were reincarnated. The soul of Zimri was reincarnated in Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of the sages of the Talmudic period. And the soul of Cosby, the Midianite princess, was reincarnated in the wife of the Roman governor Turnus Rufus. Turnus Rufus was a notorious tyrant who was responsible for plowing the earth after the destruction of the temple to dig deeper and destroy even more, which occurred on Tisha B'Av, same day that the temple was destroyed, decades later. Turnus Rufus' wife tried to seduce Rabbi Akiva, and of course he resisted. But what happened was that later on in life, Turnus Rufus' wife converted to Judaism, and she married Rabbi Akiva, the greatest of the sages. So that in fact, Zimri and Cosby were rehabilitated. So when we read about it in a different light. We're not seeing the negative, we're seeing how the negative ultimately became the catalyst for the positive. The reading of this Parshas Pinchas, occurs within the 3 weeks that we observe commemorating the destruction of the temple and the events that led to the destruction of the temple, starting with the 17th of Tammuz, when the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem and continued to pillage the city and destroy and murder till they reached the temple on Tisha B'Av and destroyed it. So we read about Parshas Pinchas in a way that tells us how this terrible evil of the Jewish prince and the Midianite princess turned into a source of peace that will ultimately restore the Beis Hamikdash, the Holy Temple, and bring us to the days of Mashiach, the days when we'll have universal peace, because we will have gotten rid of all the negatives in the world, all the evil in the world, through our collective actions today. And that's perhaps why the Parshas Pinchas should have really been the end of last week's Parsha. It started off with a story of Zimri and Cosby, but it doesn't finish it until this week, because we're talking about two different Pinchases. Last week we're talking about Pinchas, who's engaged in an act of destruction, and for which reason the Torah doesn't even want to identify the names of Zimri and Cosby. But this week it starts on the theme of rehabilitation, redemption, transformation, and that's one of the reasons in this Parsha of Pinchas we read about all the holidays, that even in this period of sadness, when we commemorate the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem, we talk about the holidays, because ultimately, as the prophet in Zechariah says, all these sad days would be transformed into holidays and joyous occasions. May we see that happening immediately. Take it umiyad mamish.